If you're enjoying the podcast and would like to help support me and help me keep it going, I'd like to mention 3 ways you can do that, and you can do all of these on my website, andyhedges.com. First is you could leave a donation on the website. That's really the only way I have to cover the costs of hosting, advertising, and other things that come up in producing these episodes. And the next thing is you could buy one of my CDs or a t-shirt. You can find all of those on the store there on the website. They're CDs of old-time cowboy songs and also of me reciting cowboy poems. And finally, you could simply go to the website and sign up for my email list. That's a good way to stay connected with me and get a monthly update of where I'll be performing and also updates on the podcast. You can do all of that at andyhedges.com. I'd like to kick off today's show with a poem by Buck Ramsey. This is actually a piece of a longer poem written by Buck called Dunder Defining. You set out defining, you're riding for boggin'. There's not a pure way to describe the rhythm and rhyme of the cowpuncher callin', the gist of the cowpuncher tribe. But say we start up with an ID of Santee, like Russell, a cowpuncher saint. The best you can say is he's good to his horses. The worst you can say is he ain't. The kind out of Old Rock and of the Long Shadow. We'd all like to be of that leather. You'd say of his makings his water runs deep, and he'd do with to ride the wild river. You can't call his rank by the crease of his hat, or by his get-up, no matter how fine. You go by the moves that he makes on his horse. Is he in the right place, the right time? He knows what the mother cow says to her calf. He's a regular Webster on cattle. He hears what the wind says and listens to grass. And he's only plumb whole in the saddle. Howdy folks, this is Andy Hedges, and you're listening to Cowboy Crossroads. On each episode, I interview a different guest and ask them to share stories and discuss music, poetry, and culture from the working cowboy West and beyond. My guest today is Chuck Hawthorne. Chuck is a singer and a songwriter who served for 21 years in the United States Marine Corps. Ray Bonneville has said that Chuck was a combat soldier with the heart of a true poet. And Michael Martin Murphey has called him the best songwriter I've heard in 20 or 30 years. I sat down with Chuck to record this interview at my dining room table in Lubbock, Texas, after a late night of swapping songs in my living room. As always, we had a great time. Here's Chuck Hawthorne.
We had such a rich musical influence in our home, and it was our mom and our dad. Now, it wasn't necessarily eclectic, but it was certainly rich, and it was heartfelt, and it was mostly country music. My dad, we were watching Creedence Clearwater Revival on the television, and he looked at me and he said, boy, them's the only hippies I like. So like I said, it wasn't necessarily eclectic, but at the same time, I look at the records that were handed down to me, and I think they were handed down to me from my aunt. I know a lot of them were, but they had everything from, Cal Smith, Johnny Cash, and Tom T. Hall to the Ventures and the Beach Boys. So there was a little bit of leeway there, but mostly what I leaned towards was, at that time, was really Tom T. Hall and Hank Snow and Johnny Cash. And Loretta Lynn. My mom was a big Loretta Lynn fan, and we heard that quite a bit in the home. And my sister Calissa played a Magnus organ, which was really a 1960s era toy organ kind of thing, where you played the notes with your right hand and the accompaniment buttons on your left. And it wasn't really meant to be a serious instrument, but it turned out to be a pretty serious instrument for me. And she taught me how to play that. And eventually even how to sing. We were at the XIT rodeo up in Dalhart, Texas. And I guess she just got tired of hearing me sing off key. And there was an Eddie Rabbit song that was pretty big at the time. Well, the windshield wipers, whatever that one is, you know. And she said, okay, sing. You know, I knew all the words back then. And she said, sing to it. And she'd go, up, 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 down, 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 right there. Right there, you know. Taught me how to sing in the KOA campgrounds outside of the XIT rodeo in Dalhart, Texas. So that's really where it really all began. But I wrote poetry and from a very young age, and was always a writer of some kind, and was encouraged to do that, not just from school, but at home as well, you know. So, I mean, it was a rich upbringing of all of that, you know, in the house. It was encouraged. Singing and listening to music was really encouraged in the house. There's three main things that have always been a huge part of my life. Was the cowboy and Western culture, particularly early on, and the military culture, and the music thing. And these three things have, for whatever reason, I've felt called to do all three of those things. And I'm the most lucky guy in the world because I've got to do all of those things. And growing up, I got to work on ranches in the Texas Panhandle and Oklahoma and all over with the two of the greatest cowboys that you know ever threw a loop, Clifton Lowe and Alvin Hamrick. And they were just not just good at what they did, they were good. They knew how to mentor a young man. And I think that more than anything, I mean, you can learn how to stick a needle in, you know, a cow or bobtail or whatever. But the real lesson is how to teach somebody how to do something, or teach somebody how to live. And man, they were both magic at it. And they didn't just teach me, you know, they taught, particularly Alvin taught my brother Tommy and my sisters, you know, how to drive a truck and, you know, one thing and another. And it was really, it was just this high adventure thing. So I got to do that, and but this all happened simultaneously. You know, I had this huge calling to be in the military. You know, I wanted to serve. And initially, I think by the time I'd become a teenager, I decided that I was going to try to be a Green Beret in the Army. I wanted to be a Special Forces cat in the Army. But when I got to high school, there was a Marine Corps Junior ROTC unit at Caprock High School in Amarillo, Texas. And it was led by some of the greatest guys you ever wanted to meet, you know. Lieutenant Colonel John Regal, Gunnery Sergeant Grice, and First Sergeant Robert LaCourse, and later on a guy named Captain Johnson. And but these were also huge mentors and knew how to mentor people, young people. And that made me change my decision. And so I went for the Marines, and I was all about it.
As As mentioned earlier, Chuck served for 21 years in the United States Marine Corps. But along the way, he was writing songs, playing guitar, and getting his chops down by playing any chance he got for anyone who would listen. And that long-term commitment to his craft is evident in the shows he performs and the songs that he writes.
I was aboard the USS Iwo Jima in the middle of the Adriatic Sea learning, and that's how I learned to play guitar, from these force reconnaissance guys we were working with on the ship. And then from there, I decided that I wanted to become an officer somewhere in there. And I applied for a commissioning program, was accepted, and eventually got accepted to the University of Texas. That didn't happen automatically. And I have probably 4 rejection letters that at some point I'm going to get framed and hang up on the wall, from UT. But, I think it was the military thing that eventually got me into UT, and that's when I discovered Austin and the music scene down there. And I wasn't even trying. I had learned to play guitar a few years earlier. I linked up with this guy named Mike Mendieta, who's a great friend of mine. And he and I started playing together, and we found out that we could play parties and campfires and all of this stuff, and it was just really popular, mostly with the girls. And that's what we were concerned about, or I was concerned about anyways. I won't speak for you, Mike. But we had just a heck of a time playing cover songs, and I was writing songs at the time, too, some of the worst songs you've ever heard. And but I was proud to be writing songs, and without even trying. Down there in Austin. A guy named Sean T. Pabst had me play his set break at his CD release at the Broken Spoke. Because the first stage I ever played on was the Broken Spoke, which just blows me away to this day. And man, we just had a lot of fun. And he ended up cutting one of my songs, and we ended up doing a duet on it. So I was in the recording studio and so on and so forth. This is within a 4-year period without even trying. Now that'll make an impression on you, And I said, man, when I get out, I'm coming back to Austin. If for no other reason, the music. In fact, that's the main reason. When I got out of the Marines, I was also going through a divorce. And I was also, you got to understand, I was in a remote duty station. I wasn't at Camp Lejeune or Camp Pendleton, California. Or, Marine Corps only got a few bases. But I wasn't surrounded by Marines. So, it was a tough time. It really was. So I'm going through a divorce. I'm retiring from the Marine Corps, and I'm moving. So all very kind of, just stressful things. It's a big moment in my life. I ended up moving down to St. Louis for a year and staying with my good friends John and Sarah Beekman for a year in their basement. And basically, I made my transition in that basement, and it wasn't pretty at times, but it was as fun as I could make it, which was a lot of music and a lot of drinking and a lot of partying in their cul-de-sac. But I really didn't have an incredibly hard time making that transition. A lot of guys do. A lot of guys have such a hard time that, they end their life over it, and I'm sure you've heard me talk about it before, but we're losing 22 veterans a day to suicide. And that's a huge problem. It took me a little bit to get sorted out, but I got myself squared away and sorted out and got my head right and pointed my nose down to Austin and shot back down there. Bought a house in Manor, Texas, just east of Austin. And was making a half-ass effort at finding a job down in Austin. And, I got tired, frankly, of people calling me and asking me, have you found a job yet? What are you doing? How's the job hunt looking? Da-da-da-da. And I'm sitting at my table and I'm looking. I've spread out all these songs that I'd written over the last 20 years over the kitchen table, and I'm looking at, and I said, the next son of a bitch that asks me what I'm doing for a living, I'm going to tell him I'm a songwriter. That's my job. And 2-3 weeks later, I went back up to St. Louis to visit John and Sarah. And I'm flying home. I'm catching a connecting flight in Chicago at O'Hare Airport there. And this guy walks up to me. I'm carrying my guitar. I carried my guitar everywhere. I'm carrying my guitar, and this guy walks up to me with a guitar. And I'm not exactly sure who he is. But we end up sitting down next to each other at the gate, and strike up a conversation. Well, it turns out it's Ray Bonneville, who's a Juno Award-winning singer-songwriter, originally from Canada, but was living in Austin at the time, and therefore we were on the same flight back to Austin. And we're talking about guitars and music and songwriting and everything else, and we just, we kind of saw eye to eye on things. But he gave me the death knell words in the music business, which is, send me some of your songs, which means really, don't bother, because I'm not going to listen to them anyways. But he did. Well, I did first, and he did. I sent about 3 or 4 songs to him the next day, and 30 minutes later, he emailed me back. And he said, let's meet for coffee and discuss your record, and I'm going to start your second career. And that's what ended up kicking me into this thing full time. And I had been trying for years to break into the music business from a pure songwriter standpoint. I didn't want to be a performer. I wanted to be the guy whose name nobody knew, behind the scenes songwriter, So I was entering songwriting contests, and I was submitting my songs to anybody that would take an unsolicited submission for songs, and it just had never gone anywhere really for me until that day that Ray Bonneville emailed me back. And man, you got to understand, after 25 years of grinding it out like that, what that really meant to me. To have somebody with his stature in the music business believe in me. So, that's what really kicked all of this off. How I met you and all of it.
I first met Chuck at the National Cowboy Poetry Gathering in Elko, Nevada in January of 2015. We became fast friends over a drink at the Pioneer Bar in Elko, especially after discovering that we were both from West Texas and that we shared a deep appreciation for the writings of Texas poet and singer Buck Ramsey.
And I come to this page, and it's got a picture of this cat named Buck Ramsey. And it says Amarillo, Texas underneath. And I said, well, that's got my attention, I'm from Amarillo, Texas, and you start researching this guy a little bit, and you figure out he was in the Marine Corps, and he had cowboyed, and now he's this singer and poet and all this other stuff. And I'm like, my God, I've got to meet this guy, So I made it my mission. I'm going to meet Buck Ramsey, come hell or high water. And I get back down to Austin, and I knew a guy had a horse operation up in Liberty Hill, north of Austin. And I went out there and played guitar all the time for him and his clients and his hands and stuff. And I was talking to Steve Shaw, up there. And I said, Steve, you ever know a guy named Buck Ramsey? And he goes, oh, my God, Buck Ramsey, And he was personal friends with him. And, of course, I was fascinated. And he started telling me all of these stories about how they would wheel Buck Ramsey into the middle of a loud party, and he would start reciting poetry off the top of his head, and just these ripples of silence would go over the entire party until it was all quiet and everybody was listening to Buck recite a poem. And it could have been a Shakespeare sonnet or whatever. And, man, the more I heard about Buck Ramsey, the more enthralled I became about him and determined to meet him. And so that holiday, Christmas, New Year's season, I took leave and I went up to Amarillo with the idea, and I said, I'm going to meet Buck. And I was playing guitar for another cowboy friend I mentioned earlier, Clifton Lowe. I was at his house, and we were drinking whiskey out of these little grape jelly jars, You never throw away a grape jelly jar. They're good for whiskey glasses. So we're sitting there, drinking a little bit of whiskey, and I'm playing him cowboy songs, and he's loving it. And I broached the subject with him. I said, Cliff, you ever heard of Buck Ramsey? And he goes, Buck, let's call that son of a bitch. And he picks up this old green rotary dial telephone, and he gets on there and calls Buck, and he gets a hold of Betty Ramsey, his wife. And Betty explains that Buck's not feeling too good, but it would be okay if we came by and visited at 9 a.m. the next day. So I can't wait, And I leave Cliff and I go pick up my buddy Brandon King in Amarillo, and we get our guitars and we go out and we play a little show for the folks out in Cecil's Bar, east of town. This is when did he pass away? 1997. Yeah, I think it was New Year's 97, right? January 3rd, maybe. Well, I get out there into that bar and I announced to the crowd, I said, tomorrow I get to meet Buck Ramsey. And some drunk in the bar said, he's dead. And I just kind of chalked it up to drunk talk or whatever. We close that bar down and we end up driving home. We get stuck in the mud trying to get home. And Brandon's wife comes and picks us up. And as she's brought an early edition of the Amarillo Globe News Sunday edition, and it's got Buck Ramsey on the cover of it, and Buck Ramsey had died. So I was one day away from meeting Buck when he passed away. Now, Coda. Years later, I'm in Stoughton, Wisconsin, and to see Ramblin' Jack Elliott. And I'm in a cafe next to the gig, and he walks in, and I'm like, Almighty, I'm gonna have to be a fan and introduce myself to Ramblin' Jack, So I said, Jack, my name's Chuck Hawthorne. I'm a big fan of yours, whatever I said. He looks at me and he goes, pleased to meet you. Where are you from? And I said, well, I'm from Amarillo, Texas. And he says, my God, Amarillo, did you know Buck Ramsey? No, sir, I didn't, and it's a long story. That's a cowboy, just in a different way. Same spirit. It's called Such Is Life, or C'est la Vie. It's a biker song with a French chorus. Well, he smelled like marijuana, two-finger cologne, and he smoked his Rico cigarettes through an ancient saxophone. He used to ride the holy wind, and he called it catching air. There ain't a bone he hadn't broken, there ain't a jump he didn't dare. He was a stove-up gifted dreamer, holding on the best he could, riding out on 6 mean strings, trips to Hollywood. Now that's a 46 Indian, leaking oil in his garage. If he lifts the door far enough, you can see his great mirage. Said, say la vie, say it to me, say la vie, she sing it to me, whoa. You never know where he's going, so hang tight and razor sharp if you're keeping up with the devil or smoking that old mouth harp. And he sang one for Jimmy Martin, and he painted David Mann on a fathead Gibson schooner. Yeah, he riding once again. Said, say la vie, say it to me, say la vie, so sing it to me, whoa. The last time I rode with him, he gave me that old Indian, and we rode on out across his great divide. And his holy wind gave him back. Now he's riding on the Zodiac. And such, my friends, is life. Say la vie, say it to me, say la vie, won't you sing it to me, oh, say la vie, sing it to me, say la vie, sing it to me, oh. Oh, thank you, Andy. Thank you so much for having me, man.
Yeah, thanks for doing this. Thanks for hanging out.
You bet. Privilege.
This was fun.
Let's do it again.
You bet. All right, folks, that's it for today's episode. I'd like to thank Chuck Hawthorne for taking the time to visit with me. You can find out more about Chuck at chuckhawthorne.com. You can find out more about me and this show at andyhedges.com. If you'd like to contact me with a comment or a question, or if you'd like to tell me a story, I'd love to hear from you. Send an email to andy@andyhedges.com. Thank you for listening to Cowboy Crossroads.